Here we have a problem on angles. Okay, let's go to the question. In the figure below, L and M are parallel, R and T are perpendicular, and measure of angle 1 is 32 degree. Lines L, R, and T intersect at one point. Find measure of angle 2, measure of angle 3, measure of angle 4, measure of angle 5, measure of angle 6. Okay, here the two lines L and M are parallel, and the two lines R and T are perpendiculars. Okay, so whenever two parallel lines intersected by a third line, it's called a transversal. So here the two parallel lines L and M intersected by the two lines R and T. So the two lines R and T are called transversals. Okay, so here R and T are perpendicular, and also it is given that the angle measure between the lines, two lines R and T, it's right angle, it's 90-degree angle measure we have over here. And the measure of angle 1, it is given, that is 32 degree. So then what must be the measure of angle 2? So actually measure of angle 1 and measure of angle 2 together form a right angle over here. So measure of angle 1 and measure of angle 2 must add up to 90 degree. So if the measure of angle 1 is 32, what is the measure of angle 2 over here? So it has to be 58. So to get the measure of angle 2, what I did is I subtracted 32 from 90. So when I subtract 32 from 90, I get 58 as a measure of angle 2. Now if I add 32 and 50, that is 90 degree. So that's the angle measure we have over here. So the measure of angle 2 equals to 58. Okay, now let's find the measure of angle 3. Here the angle measure 3 and angle measure 2 are vertically opposite angles, because here we have a point of intersection of the three lines R, T, and L. So whenever there is a point of intersection of some lines, and if two angle measures are opposite each other, then those two angle measures are called vertically opposite angles, and they must be equal in measure. Already we know that the measure of angle 2 is 58. Then what is the measure of angle 3? So the measure of angle 3 is also 58, because angle measure 2 and angle measure 3 are vertically opposite angles, so they must be equal in measure. So measure of angle 3 equals to 58. Okay, now let's find the measure of angle 4. Here the measure of angle over here is 90 degree, because there is a right angle over here. And what about this angle measure? So this angle measure and this angle measure together form a straight angle, because this is an angle on straight line T. So already we know that the measure of an angle which is on the straight line is 180 degree. So we have the angle measure 4 and this angle measure on the straight line. So this angle measure and this angle measure must add up to 180 degree, because these two angle measure together form a straight angle. But already we know that the measure of angle over here, I mean this is 90 degree. And what must be the measure of angle over here? So this one also must be 90 degree, so that these two angles are together will form a straight angle 180 degree. So if this is 90 and this one must be 90. So to get the angle measure 4, we have to subtract 90 from 180. So now we get the angle measure 4, that is the angle measure 4 equals to 90 degree. Okay, now let's find the angle measure 5. Here the two parallel lines L and M intersected by the transversal T. Whenever two parallel lines intersected by a transversal, the corresponding angles must be equal. So the angle measure over here and the angle measure over here are corresponding angles when the two parallel lines L and M intersected by the transversal T. So angle measure 2 and angle measure 5 are corresponding angles. They must be equal in measure. Already we know that the angle measure 2 equals to 58. Then what must be the angle measure of 5? So that must also be 58, because angle measure 2 and angle measure 5 are corresponding angles. So measure of angle 5 equals to 58 degree. Okay, now let's find the angle measure 6. Here again the same thing, the two parallel lines L and M intersected by the transversal R. So when two parallel lines L and M intersected by the transversal R, so the angle measure we have over here, the angle measure we have over here are corresponding angles. They must be equal in measure. That is the angle measure 1 and angle measure 6 are corresponding angles when the two parallel lines L and M intersected by the transversal R. So since angle measure 1 and 6 are corresponding angles, they must be equal in measure. Okay, so already we know that the angle measure 1, that is given in the question itself, that is 32. So then the angle measure of 6 also must be 32. So because the angle measure 1 and angle measure 6 are corresponding angles. Now I got the angle measures of 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6.